Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm wearing a t shirt because it's kind of hot in here. And I want to talk about the value of effort. What does that mean? Well, it's really just about how much you value effort. And I do mean you, as in the sort of individual people who are watching this video, including, myself and others. It's kind of an opinionated concept. And I've seen examples of this being a thing happen a lot, like in the last couple of days. And what I mean is lots of discussions that happen kind of often. People bringing up the Garrix and pop music and trailers and that kind of thing. And you might think, what do they all have in common? And the problem, what they all have in common is that because of the relative simplicity of what it takes to produce the things I just named, a lot of people get really mad when they're extremely successful. And myself included, this has been a problem for me. And I remember distinctly the first time I heard Martin Garrix's Animals. I wasn't aware that it was a big thing. It probably was already a big thing when I first heard it, but I just didn't know, or maybe it was before. There was a music video, so it wasn't like I heard it before it was released or anything. And like I heard it and I listened to it, and I thought, that's pretty simple. It's kind of an interesting concept, interesting place to go. The very sparse drop is the first time I'd ever heard that style. I've never heard Big Room before that, and so I mean I heard Minimal House, but the difference being that Big Room has this kind of bombastic rising thing to it, and then it drops into nothingness, which later started to really annoy me. But at the time, I had never heard that, and I thought, that's actually kind of creative. That's very different. It's an interesting place to take places. It's not going to be a thing I care about because it's devoid of any kind of interesting sound design, which is my whole point of existing. So I just didn't really care. And then, to my surprise, it became like an international mega phenomenon, and I got mad. I got salty, which is and the idea that why is something that takes measurably a fraction of the normal effort, and it's just sort of angry and mad and whatever. It was a little bit easier for me to just sort of get over myself and just be like, well, that's what people like, and that's what people like, and that's how it doesn't, because at the end of the day, how hard it is to do something doesn't directly correlate to its success. And this is going to be even more true with the other examples that I'm going to cite. Other example where this was a big problem for me to pass was when this was actually a while ago, when I saw the trailer for the remake, the Evil Dead remake, and in the trailer, it's just a trend that horror trailers had just started to pick up on at the time, and definitely went into to the point where they're still doing it now, where they have the one screechy, loud sound that happens. It's kind of like the Inception sound, only a scary version, and it just kind of repeats over the trailer. It's big impact, kind of thing. That's their thing, and the Evil Dead was no exception. And so the thing that they decided to do was to have a naked factory massive preset just on the sound in the trailer. And I was just like, when I heard that, I'm like, and I made a post in the Image Line Alpha forums, and people who I thought would be sympathetic to my pain here, and they pointed out to me that the number of people who would even know what Massive was, let alone that was a preset for Massive, is just so small, so ridiculously niche, that whoever put that in the trailer was actually a very smart person for not expending as much effort to complete the product that he was assigned to create. And that actually rang pretty true to my mind and introduced me to a concept that later I sort of expanded upon to the idea that you do not have to make yourself do things the hard way if there is an easy way to accomplish the same result. And what the results are and what your goals are might be different, and that might not apply to you. In this case, the result and the goal was to make a thing that was the Evil Dead trailer music. And so the person who created it did so efficiently and made a pretty fine version of it. And, that begged the question that if I didn't know what Massive was and I was intimately familiar with its presets, if that would, I mean, that's the whole reason why it sounded bad to me. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this feeling when they hear like a new like electro track, and you hear all the stock FL drums totally just unprocessed, and then immediately makes you think less of it. And if you didn't know anything about FL, that wouldn't occur to you. But because you do, because you know how much effort went in to make it, and you know very, very well, you immediately think less of it. And that feeling is really interesting to think about, because can you really make a saying as to whether or not it's good or bad? I personally can say that it bugs the shit out of me when I hear top level, professional, presumably highly paid work being accomplished by stuff that I could have done when I was in high school. That's stuff that you could do when you're in high school right now, for those of you who are. The whole massive preset thing. It's not so much that, because yeah, the guy that did it was a smart man for you doing the way he did it, but it's the idea that like if you're going to be at that kind of pro level thing, that you shouldn't be doing noob level stuff. Because the idea, of being a noob, and this is not exactly a true concept, but when you're a noob, you're generally thinking that you're not successful because you're a noob. And that if you do better and you get better and do more pro level things, that you will become a professional and then you'll be successful. This is obviously not the case, but this is still something that you think. And as a result, when you hear professionals do stuff like that, like you hear FL Slayer in a video game soundtrack, or you hear the Negative Massive preset in a trailer for something, you hear an unprocessed FL drums in like pro level releases, you get mad because you at that point you can no longer justify why those people are in the positions they are, and then you're in the position that you're in. And then later you realize, oh, the music industry has actually almost nothing to do with actual creative talent, and it has mostly more to do with networking and connections. And you realize stuff that like, oh, Skrillex had actually been in the music industry for a very long time before he had made himself Skrillex. And then Martin Garrix's uncle ran Spinnin' or something like that. He had some kind of higher up connection for that kind of thing. Most of these stories where you hear about people who break out of nowhere were definitely not out of nowhere. It's just out of nowhere to us because we weren't paying attention. Or we just didn't know because we're not industry insiders. And so, that all goes out the window about the idea that everyone who's a professional is so because they are better at the craft than you. That's just provably false. But still, even knowing this idea that success is not directly correlated to how much work you put into something, most people still judge effort and quality as being something that's related. And this has been proven super true as a perception in how hardstyle has gone in when I've been doing hardstyle stuff. Like, my whole problem with the concept of hardstyle kick was not that it was I thought it was easy, because I never thought it was easy. It ended up being a lot harder than I thought it'd be, but it still wasn't as hard as people were making it out to be. And it was weird because when this conversation was started, people were discussing kicks on other producers' tracks, not even mine, but like actual hardstyle professionals' tracks, and they were judging them, and they would judge it on a scale of how long they think it took them to make them. Just be like, oh, that was like a 2-week kick, or that was like a 1 week, a month kick, and then they even derided a noise controller's track because they thought that that kick sounded like they had made it like the day of or something. And what kills me about the hardstyle thing, the weeks and the months process, whatever, I can understand it taking him, months to make one of those things because I don't know what I'm doing. But if someone who's been producing hardstyle forever and has done it hundreds of times still needs to take a month to do something that took him a month to do 10 years ago, then there's something wrong with that. Either that or they're actually applying, the effort to do something new and amazing. But to do the same thing, it should take you less time each time you do it because you're better at it. And I'm sure many of you experienced this. The first song you made took you so long, and it was a lifetime of work seemingly. And then when it was done, you're just like you were so tired, and the concept of starting a new track was just unbearable because the idea that you didn't want to go through the whole process again. Well, then you did, and you realized, oh, you just did a lot of the things that were difficult really, really quickly because you did it already. Now you understand stuff. That is the description of what it means to have experience. And so the idea that experienced hardstyle producers would, take forever on a kick and then take exactly the same amount of time on the exact same kick, it's just bothersome. And that whole idea. And so, but the fans and the other producers are still discussing the value of the kick in terms of length and effort spent on it. And to some extent, I can kind of understand that, because that's still kind of true for sort of your typical bro steppy bass design and dubstep. A lot of people get really mad when they find out that a producer didn't make, they use samples. Like they get all up on Zomboy's case because he ripped off Skrillex a lot and used actual Skrillex samples, or would use sample pack samples in his tracks and not actually have produced the bass samples himself. And then a lot of people come in and just be like, well, guitarists don't build their guitars from scratch for every song. And they use amplifiers that they didn't bake and that kind of thing. And so then this weird sort of questioning starts to come pop in your head about what it is about the songs that actually has value. And in the genres, does it, like in a hardstyle genre, it appears to actually matter more than the actual music itself, the amount of effort put into the song. But then in other genres, does that matter? In pop music, that apparently absolutely does not matter, because the target audiences are people who barely don't know anything about that kind of stuff. Maybe a disproportionate amount of hardstyle producers are themselves producers. There's this concept of music for musicians, where you're designing music that be interesting to musicians, because when you know a little bit about something, it takes exponentially more impressive amounts of that something to be impressive to you anymore. Like, when I first started out, there were sounds that I would hear that blew my mind apart, and that now I know how to make, and as a result are no longer impressive to me. It's not, and it's because I know how it's done. So songs and stuff that used to blow my mind just they don't. And so for someone to do something, and here's the problem with that though, is that there could be a kind of song, like hardstyle, for example, I was really not into it. Now that I actually understand more about the sound design and the effort that goes into it, it's actually kind of good to listen to now. And it's entirely because I am impressed by it. When I was not impressed by it, when I was sort of just writing it off, I saw no value in listening to it, and I thought it sounded bad. But now I see a kind of beauty in it because I understand more about the production. And people who are laymen, people who don't understand enough about production, probably are less likely to like the genre than if they did not know about it. So maybe that is a thing. And, that's true for metal as well. Metal music, the more complicated genres of metal music appeal way more to musicians than they do to just regular people. And even the more regular people that do like it they probably have some extra musical aptitude as a result, which is kind of weird. In fact, I used to say that just listening to Animals as Leaders made me a better guitarist. And I honestly think that's true, just because before I'd heard Toes of the Boss do stuff to a guitar that I didn't know was possible, I didn't know it was possible. And so then my brain expanded about what you could do with guitars, and I became a better guitarist. So it's sort of the same deal with producing. The first time I heard Noisia, and I didn't understand that sounds like that were possible, then suddenly, my whole horizons were just all over the place. And that kind of thing. I'm not totally sure where I was going with that, but all of that just serves to display how just weird it is that, I guess it's not that weird. I guess that's actually just went to explain how totally reasonable it is for us to correlate effort with value. And which I honestly believe is why more producers don't show off how they did what they did. And it's not because they were afraid that what they did was so simple that people think they were dumb for doing it, or that it ended up dissuading and ended up devaluing the product, but because even if it was impressive, even if it was something really difficult and really awesome, explaining it makes it less impressive, because now you know. It's the same thing with magic tricks, like you when you don't understand a magic trick, you're just like, what is that? I can't even, how does? And then you learn it, and then even if it ends up being like some ridiculously precise and still very impressive feat of physical sleight of hand and all that kind of crap, the fact that you now know with certainty, it sort of takes the wonder away with it. Because before that, the possibilities are infinity, and your assumptions are huge, and you immediately jump to whatever you think is the most ridiculous outcome, ridiculous possibility in your brain, and you entertain the possibility, because until you're proven otherwise, it's possible. And then when you are shown, it's always less than the hype. That's just the truth. Marketing knows this too. I just use the word hype, and that should have evoked many ideas about things like movies or games, where the trailers before release are always about the hype. It's always about showing things in exactly the particular way that should elicit wonder about what else is there. And usually what you get is way less than what you expected. And very few times, and very few amazing times. You are greeted with something that is actually way more than what you thought of. And that's just because we're human and we can't literally contemplate infinity. But for music, this is still very true. And again, why I think that the high top level, pro level producers don't really want to display their secrets. It's not because they're afraid of competition. It's not because they ultimately think that what they do is not impressive, but because it will always be less impressive than what our wildest dreams are. I bet they hate me now. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because as beyond this consideration and something to think about, I also don't want it to paint the value of music. And this is why I try, when I'm making something, to see it not through a lens of like my own experiences, but what somebody who had no idea about what I was doing would hear of it. And like I wished I applied this to some of my older stuff, like the bass antics or menagerie, that kind of thing, because it was totally awesome when I made it at the time, and it was awesome for a lot of reasons that are not totally conducive to just being listened to as music. And like, as much as I think it's totally dope, because I think it's totally dope. I mean, I went and played it at a party once. I played the menagerie and I think bass antics at some just random party, and I realized just how horribly it crashed with the mood. Not just because it was just different genres of music or whatever, but because it itself wasn't accessible for regular music listeners. And I realized that pretty much the only people that would really like that stuff were people who were producers themselves and could understand the complexity of what I had done. And there's nothing wrong with that, really, but I just kind of expected something more of the actual music at that point, which was incorrect. But if I ever wanted to make something that was more accessible, that's the kind of crap I had to think about. You have to think about that kind of stuff. And on the other hand, I also don't want to write off like a track because it used naked FL assets, or because someone like, on one hand, there's like personal effort where like I want to do what I want to do, but like I want to do something that feels difficult because it just feels good to do something that's difficult. On the other hand, like there's purposely doing things the hard way just because you wanna, and then there's fooling yourself into doing the hard way because you think it's better just because it was harder. Like, I'm trying to think of a reasonable example. I don't know, like the resampling stuff, like or even the hard style stuff. Like a lot of the examples I saw about like long-term kick processing, after a point, I did not see a measurable like difference in the results of something that was like beyond the first 20 minutes of whoever they were doing. I think it was a Frontliner video or something. I don't remember who it was, but it was a 2-hour long video. And like the guy had basically he had the shape of what he was going to get in the first like half hour of what he was doing. And everything else he had done after that was just more making it denser and denser, but it wasn't actually becoming different. It wasn't actually like turning into something that was measurably worth the effort that he was putting into it, at least in my eyes. It's possible that I just wasn't hearing it just because I'm not a hardstyler at heart, but that's just sort of what I saw out of that. And so, like, there's a question, there's something, I guess, another term I want to put into this, and this idea of elegance. Elegance does not mean the same thing as simplicity, although there is an amount of elegance in simplicity. It's like, again, not trying not to overcomplicate things when you don't necessarily need to. I mean, if you're not totally sure what I'm talking about elegance, there's actually a lot of this present if you're ever involved in mathematical proofs. The idea of not taking as many steps to get to a particular result. A stupidly easy example would be like if someone gave you a number, like say 2, and said, add something to this to get 4. And instead of just adding 2 again to get 4, which would be the fastest and simplest answer, you added 3 and then you added -1. Like, that's still technically correct, but that's not as elegant. That's not an elegant approach. So then in sound design, an elegant approach is, taking the least amount of steps to get to a desired result as you possibly can and not overcomplicating it, which I totally do. Like the current hardstyle kick I have, for example, in the track from scratch stream, is not elegant. It's not, even for what I'm doing and for what I'm trying to do, it is not the simplest solution to get to where I've gotten. I could definitely work that to a point where I use less to do even more, or even just as much as I have done. And that's just because I don't understand it well enough to apply to apply myself to create that kind of elegance. That's all there is to that. But at no point should you, like, even if I had two examples of it, of like, maybe because I use like 5 harmers and a citrus, and like if I used only 2 harmers to get the exact same result, you should not look at the 2 harmers as being worse because it was an easier result, a more elegant result. Like, that's, I don't know. That's the kind of the weirdness that comes out of this effort and value idea, is that a lot of people will assume that if it was easier, that it is somehow less valuable. And I mean, I guess the proof is in just the results there, with the idea that like a song like Animals that Martin Garrix made, which is just the height of simplicity compared to a lot of stuff that I do, is the more successful song. And that's, of course, if you measure a good result based on that kind of stuff. Because if the results are going after is just pure success, then you're way overdoing it by doing the kind of music that I like in general. But if you judge success based on the fact that you want to listen to it and you like, this kind of bass music, then Animals didn't even accomplish that at all, which is personally just has everything to do with your own personal idea of what that means, of what value actually is. Like more examples, try to think more examples, but it's a weird idea, and it's one that I don't think is ever going to go away anytime soon. Everyone, it's a human idea to just equate moreness and bigness and more difficulty with being better. And it's unfortunate because this means that a lot of people spend a lot of time doing really difficult stuff to get results that are not worth the amount of effort they put in. And that's where the idea of elegance comes in, where you really want to work smarter, not harder. And that's where that term comes from. That's this entire idea about life and more other things. This is where that comes in. And this idea of like, I don't know. I guess I'm just repeating myself now. So cool. There's that. I hope that made sense. It was kind of a ramble. It kind of went places there. Yeah. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.